It's time for the Susan Taylor Podcast, where we discuss the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing. Author of Feeling Good Matters, Sexual Radiance, and the Vital Energy Program, Dr. Taylor imparts authentic knowledge and practical tools that inspire, educate, and empower us to be a healing force for positive change. So join us and take your life and our planet to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Podcast 64, Can Breathing Push Away Anxiety? It may be hard to believe that 9 out of 10 adults breathe incorrectly. What that does is it impairs their health and exacerbates any anxiety or depression that may be lurking. But fortunately, we can learn how to breathe and do it correctly. In today's episode, I'd like to discuss how breathing affects anxiety, proper breathing techniques, and how to strengthen your breathing muscle. When thoughts that threaten our security happen, in the case of anxiety, our breathing rate and patterns change. Instead of breathing slowly from our lower lungs, we begin to breathe rapidly and shallowly from our upper lungs. And if during this time we're not physically exerting ourselves, then we can have a phenomenon called hyperventilation. And this in turn can explain why we have many uncomfortable symptoms when we feel anxiety. And some of these symptoms can include dizziness, shortness of breath, maybe a lump in the throat, tingling or numbness in the hands or feet because we're not getting enough oxygen to those areas. Even nausea and confusion can happen. But the good news is that by changing the way we breathe, we can reverse these symptoms. By shifting our breathing rate and pattern, we can actually stimulate the body's parasympathetic response. Remember, you've heard me say we have two branches of our autonomic nervous system, both a parasympathetic branch and a sympathetic. The sympathetic is when we get aroused, at fight or flight, and the parasympathetic is when we're restful and relaxed. And the body's emergency response, that's the sympathetic, is something that happens when we get into an anxiety situation. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'll call the breathing that we want to really engage through a parasympathetic response, I'll call it the breathing to remain calm. Not only are we consciously aware in the moment when we're calm, but actually everything goes into a relaxation response. When we're calm, we do create a parasympathetic response, as I just mentioned, which means our system goes into a calmer and more relaxed state. When this happens, our oxygen consumption decreases, our breathing slows, our heart rate even slows, blood pressure decreases, muscle tension decreases, and we have a growing sense of ease in the body and calmness in mind. For this reason, it's important for us to know what specific skills will reverse this emergency response and will keep us calm and our body calm as well as our mind clear. Keep in mind that psychologists don't typically focus on breathing, and I've had many clients who have had anxiety and depression and had come to me from referral from psychologists or even psychiatrists or primary care when the meds just aren't working. And what we did is they've come for nutrition advice, but I've always looked at them and said, hey, we need to work on breath, because many of them, in fact all of them, were breathing incorrectly. And no matter what nutrient I would suggest, it just wouldn't work at the root level. Note that I'm talking about breath here for anxiety, but keep in mind there are emotional causes. There are many other things that are integrated into anxiety. I'm just talking about breath for this podcast, but again, that's not the only thing that causes. In fact, that's just the symptom that changes. It's the thoughts that create the anxiety. So keep that in mind in this case. There's also biological problems that happen that cause anxiety, because whenever the body feels, for example, that it's starving or lack of breath, if you're held underwater, or maybe you don't have enough estrogen in your body circulating, the body can respond in a way as a fight or flight, or it needs some security, and anxiety can happen from all of these things. So again, I'm talking about breath as a way to help us push away anxiety, but not necessarily cure it on every single level that we're talking about. Proper breathing is the foundation for our health and happiness. Breathing is a cornerstone of good health, and changing the way we breathe can have an enormous impact, improving our sleep, our cognition, our eating habits even, and resilience to stress and more. So even when we lower our inflammation level, for example, we improve our gastrointestinal function, that's our GI function, that's our digestive function, we could actually increase longevity and reduce pain. Because when you're in pain, you tense up, and then in turn that affects your breathing, making it shallower. And this actually makes pain feel worse and can lead to a vicious circle when pain becomes constant and anxiety then can be produced. So how does it work? Well, people who are anxious tend to breathe in their upper lungs and the upper chest with a shallow, rapid breath instead of breathing into the lower lungs, as I mentioned before, in the lower chest. And again, I said that this causes hyperventilation, shallow upper lung breathing. So to breathe correctly, we need to engage the lower lungs with a full, smooth, and balanced breath. And this is called natural breathing or abdominal diaphragmatic breathing. And in fact, it's a good way to breathe all day long. I say make diaphragmatic breathing your default breath, unless you're involved in physical activity. In other words, you should practice breathing this way all day long, since it provides sufficient oxygen intake and controls the exhalation and of our carbon dioxide levels. You know, children before the age of 5 breathe this way, and just watch a baby. They breathe from their belly. Their belly will actually move on the inhalation as it expands, and it deflates and it on their exhale. So just watch, it moves, and give it a try. Put your right hand on your chest now, and let your left on your belly, and take a breath and see which one moves. Your chest, the hand that's on your chest, shouldn't move, and your belly would move if you're breathing using the abdominal diaphragmatic breath. But don't worry about that. There's ways to learn that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You know, there are many who impose variations on this, but the key is to engage the diaphragm. And it may take a month or so to learn and make it your default breath. So don't worry about it if you don't do it right now, but you can learn this. Because we have to be aware of breath holding. You know, there are many experts out there teaching breath holding, although there are useful yoga practices for this in the case of anxiety. But I wouldn't suggest this, because unless you're proficient in your exhale, being twice as long as your inhale for a count of 16, then hold off breathing by holding your breath until you've trained your nervous system to accommodate the change. Otherwise, you're going to be doing more damage than not, and you may not even see it on a gross level, but it will hurt the nervous system on a very subtle level, and over time, it will have an ill effect. Learn steady and smooth breathing without jerks or pauses. And by practicing daily and making diaphragmatic breathing your default breath, well, after a month or so, you're going to see tremendous results. Remember to engage your diaphragm when breathing all the time. That's the key. And you might know that muscles will atrophy. When we go to the gym, we always say if we don't use our muscles, they're going to atrophy. Well, if you've been breathing improperly for several decades, it's going to take some time to retrain your breathing muscles, that's your diaphragm, and there's others, before you can breathe optimally. Even athletes can have weak breathing muscles because in order to be strong, they have to be worked out separately, and it doesn't happen automatically simply because you're breathing heavily. It really has nothing to do with your lung capacity. Your breathing muscles include your intercostals, which are the muscles that run between your ribs, allowing your chest to move, your chest wall to move. You have the diaphragm, that's that thin sheet of muscle that extends across your thoracic cavity below your heart and lungs, and that's above your digestive system, and that's a muscle, and that can be trained. You also have your obliques in active breathing, and they're the one that you get that six-pack when you do crunches in the gym or whatever. They're your largest outermost muscles of the lateral anterior abdomen. And they also get involved if you're doing an active breath. And then you have the muscles of the pelvic floor. So how do you strengthen your breathing muscles? Well, There are 3 poses that I always go over when I teach meditation practices or relaxation practices, or even how to diaphragmatically breathe when you're learning. And they're on your abdomen in the crocodile pose, then on your back. And then I have people do it in a seated pose on a chair. And once learned, you can use light weights while lying down to strengthen the diaphragm. You can also do what I call a pullover when I used to train people in the gym, taking a weight, and you should have somebody show you how to do this, where your arms are extended over your head, and as you exhale, you bring them forward and with a little light weight, and you're actually doing a pull over, and that actually strengthens the diaphragm. But you need to really see this and have someone show you how to do that. Because when we work those muscles, we really engage them. And then breathing will have a dramatic effect on our ability to breathe well. All those muscles will help the breathing go. So the breathing muscles will actually change, get strong, and we'll be able to bring more air into our system and more pran, right? More vital energy in as we take our inhalation. And when we exhale, we'll be able to get rid of more toxins, because exhalation is primarily governed by our intercostals and obliques if we're doing an active breath. Oftentimes feeling short of breath is due to insufficient exhalation, leaving excess residual air in our lungs. And with age, our intercostals and obliques can weaken, thereby weakening our ability to exhale fully. So keep that in mind. When I teach, as I said, I teach the basics so that you understand the mechanics. That's why I'm mentioning all of this. We make the exhale active. We want to squeeze in and add a little. So do that right now. Inhale. And as you exhale, just pull those abdominal muscles in just a little bit. That's an active exhalation. It's not necessary, but it will train those muscles. When people think about exhaling, most people think inhale, exhale, let go. And that's okay, but we should also learn what it means to have an active exhale. And we want to have some firmness in our structure if we're walking around and engaging in life during the day. And you can think about that by bringing your belly button closer to your spine when you exhale, and even your ribs will come together a little bit. And that's a real strong exhale, what I call an active exhale versus a passive exhale. When you're doing diaphragmatic breathing daily, you can have a slight active exhalation, but you can also have it as passive. But just don't let yourself slump and become sloppy. About 50% of people can change their breathing for the better by just using and reading a book or listening to this podcast. But I really suggest doing a session with someone like myself or someone who's really knowledgeable. You can do it if you can't meet them in person. You can do it as a Skype or a Google Hangout or something where you have a coach help you with that if you're just getting started, so that you can get right on the right track, and then it's smooth sailing for you. Just keep that in mind. And again, there are people out there. If you can't find someone, you want to have someone in your area, contact me. I'll find one of our trained people that will be able to teach you, or you can engage me if you want. I'm leaving for India, and I'll be announcing that the next couple of podcasts because we're going to be off for a couple of weeks. But if I'm here, I'll be glad to help you, or again, I'll pass it on to someone who will help you. Let's talk about the importance of stretching. Stretching helps improve the range of motion and flexibility of our whole body and our breathing muscles. And proper breathing is an important aspect of effective stretching as well. Conversely, stretching can also improve our breathing. So since our intercostals are 2 layers of muscles on the inside of our ribs, the best way you could stretch them is by inhaling and stretching. And this opens up the space between our ribs, and the air moves in to that whole area, and it allows that rib cage to expand and stretch. And you can add a little bit more. So just keep stretching and then releasing. And also what I like to do in the yoga world, for those that are doing asana, which means yoga or just posture. But if we do anything with the spinal twist. And that, again, needs to be a skilled practitioner teaching you that, because especially you don't want to be twisting if your back is out or your spine is not aligned. It must be done very skillfully. I have people do it on the floor very gently with props just to get those muscles moving. And especially if there's any back issues, that's something that has to be addressed. Again, there are people that can really help you with that. So let's move and say, as we apply these skills, keep two things in mind. First, our breathing is dictated in part by our current thoughts. Keep that in mind. The thoughts are where the breathing follows our thoughts. And mind follows thoughts, and mind follows breath. So make sure you also work on changing any negative thoughts that may enter the mind field. And as well as when you're breathing during a panic attack, or if you've had, any kind of stressful response, like a reaction that keeps you out of being calm. Keep that in mind, what thoughts are coming through. And these skills work to a degree you are willing to focus on them. Remember, focus creates happiness, and focus creates our internal skill on how to move and shift in the direction of resilience. We need to focus. So put most of your effort into not thinking about anything, not worried about your thoughts, not what you're going to do after you finish listening to this podcast, or not what you're going to do after you learn the breathing skill. Just be present in the moment and know that this will come. Don't worry about developing the skill. It will come with just practice. And there are plenty people, even me, who will help you and guide you on learning these skills. But do your research first. I would do research and see, what about diaphragmatic breathing? I know that more people are starting to advertise that because we're seeing that we really need to get beyond many of these other things that are not working and really incorporate things that we can do within our own body and mind complex. So do your research, and any questions or comments, please let me know. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Contact us at susantaylor.org if you have any questions, comments, or even feedback. And again, thank you for listening. The Susan Taylor podcast comes out every week. And this podcast was a result of you writing in and saying, are there any other techniques? How about breathing? And what are some of the symptoms of anxiety? So I included them into this one podcast. So any comments on this podcast, let me know. You can let me know by feedback at susantaylor.org or comment on the Facebook page. Until next time, remain calm.